Marcus Rodriguez had seen enough blood to fill an ocean. As a Navy SEAL medic with 3 tours under his belt, he could stitch wounds while bullets flew overhead and perform surgery in the back of a moving truck. His hands never shook, his voice never wavered, and his mind stayed crystal clear even when chaos erupted around him. That reputation followed him home to Chicago, where he now worked as a paramedic trying to find purpose in civilian life. The emergency call came in at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Domestic violence situation, victim with multiple injuries, suspect fled the scene. Marcus and his partner Jake pulled up to the run-down apartment building on the south side, red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Police cars were already there, officers securing the perimeter while neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing. 4th floor, apartment 4B, Officer Martinez briefed them as they grabbed their equipment. 26-year-old female, conscious but hurt pretty bad. Boyfriend did a number on her before he ran. She's not talking much, but she needs medical attention fast. Marcus nodded, slinging his medical bag over his shoulder. Jake carried the stretcher as they climbed the narrow staircase, their boots echoing off cracked walls covered in graffiti. The building smelled of cigarettes, cooking oil, and desperation. It reminded Marcus of some of the places he'd been overseas, where poverty and violence walked hand in hand. The apartment door stood open, yellow crime scene tape fluttering in the hallway breeze. Inside, the small living room looked like a war zone. Furniture was overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor, and dark stains marked the cheap carpet. A lamp lay shattered near the window, its cord wrapped around the base like a noose. Marcus stepped carefully through the debris, his trained eyes taking in every detail. This wasn't just anger or a fight that got out of hand. This was systematic, methodical destruction designed to terrorize. The pattern of damage told a story of calculated violence, each broken item placed to send a message. "She's in the bedroom," Officer Martinez said, leading them down a short hallway. "Found her sitting on the bed when we arrived. Won't let anyone touch her except to check for weapons. Says she doesn't need help, but look at her." The bedroom was small and dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. On the edge of a mattress that had seen better days sat a woman who made Marcus stop in his tracks. She wasn't what he expected. Despite the blood trickling from a split lip and the bruises already forming on her arms, she sat with perfect military posture. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her green eyes scanned the room with the same tactical awareness Marcus recognized in himself. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus, I'm a paramedic," he said softly, setting his bag down slowly where she could see it. "I'm here to help you with your injuries." She looked at him with those sharp green eyes, and he saw something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't fear or vulnerability like most domestic violence victims showed. It was assessment. She was evaluating him as a threat, calculating distances to exits and positioning herself for potential combat. These weren't the reactions of a helpless victim. These were the instincts of a trained soldier. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady despite the split lip. "Just need everyone to leave so I can clean up." Marcus knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." She wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand, and Marcus noticed calluses on her knuckles that came from years of combat training. Her forearms showed old scars that looked like they came from knives or shrapnel, not kitchen accidents or normal civilian life. "Sarah, I can see you're hurt. That cut on your forehead needs attention, and I need to check if you have any internal injuries." Marcus kept his voice calm and professional, but his mind was racing. Every detail about this woman screamed military training. The way she held herself, the way her eyes never stopped moving, the controlled breathing even while injured. "I've had worse," Sarah said, and Marcus believed her. "This is nothing." Jake started setting up the stretcher, but Sarah's body tensed immediately. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I can take care of myself." Marcus held up his hands. "Nobody's forcing you to do anything. But I need to at least clean those wounds and make sure you don't have a concussion. Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Sarah's jaw tightened. Boyfriend got angry. Things got broken. He left. End of story. But Marcus could read between the lines. The apartment showed signs of a prolonged, vicious attack. Yet Sarah sat there with relatively minor injuries. Either she was incredibly lucky, or she knew how to fight back. Given her obvious military bearing, Marcus suspected the latter. "How long were you in the service?" he asked quietly. Sarah's eyes snapped to his face, and for the first time her composure cracked slightly. What makes you think I was in the service? Your posture. The way you're watching the room. Those scars on your arms. Marcus gestured gently. I'm a former SEAL. I recognize the signs. Something shifted in Sarah's expression. The wall she'd built up wavered for just a moment. Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Combat medic. Marcus felt his respect for her double. Combat medics were some of the bravest people he'd ever served with, running into danger to save others while being primary targets themselves. Then you know I need to check you for injuries properly. Adrenaline can mask a lot of damage. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slightly. 5 minutes. Then everyone leaves. As Marcus began his examination, he noticed more details that painted a clearer picture. The defensive wounds on her forearms were fresh, but there were other marks too. A bruise on her ribs that was days old, fading fingerprints on her wrists, and the way she flinched when he moved too quickly near her left side. This wasn't the first time. Sarah Chen, decorated combat veteran and trained medic, was trapped in a cycle of domestic violence, and somehow, that realization hit Marcus harder than any battlefield injury he'd ever treated. As Marcus cleaned the cut on Sarah's forehead, his hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Here was a woman who had probably saved dozens of lives under enemy fire, who had faced down Taliban fighters and survived multiple deployments. Yet she was trapped in her own home by someone who claimed to love her. This needs stitches, Marcus said, examining the gash above her left eyebrow. And I'm concerned about that bruising on your ribs. When did that happen? Sarah's jaw tightened. Few days ago, I fell down the stairs. Marcus had heard that lie 1,000 times in his paramedic career. He'd also seen enough combat injuries to know the difference between accidental trauma and intentional violence. The bruising pattern on her ribs was consistent with repeated kicks or punches, not a fall. Sarah, I've been doing this for a while, he said gently, applying antiseptic to her wounds. These injuries tell a story, and it's not about falling downstairs. She pulled away from him, her green eyes flashing with anger. Just don't. You don't know anything about my situation. You're right, I don't, Marcus admitted. But I know about being in impossible situations. I know about feeling trapped. And I know about trying to handle everything alone. Jake cleared his throat from the doorway. Marcus, we've got another call coming in. We need to wrap this up. Marcus looked at his partner, then back at Sarah. Give me 2 more minutes. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, do you want to press charges? We can put out a bolo for your boyfriend, bring him in tonight. Sarah shook her head immediately. No charges. I just want everyone to leave. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. If you won't go to the hospital, at least let me give you my card. If you need help, medical or otherwise, you call me, day or night. She looked at the card he offered, then at his face. Why do you care? You don't know me. Because you served. Because you saved lives. Because nobody deserves to live in fear. Especially not someone who fought for our freedom. Marcus kept his voice steady, and because I recognized the look in your eyes. You're planning something. Sarah's expression went carefully blank, but Marcus caught the flash of recognition. She was planning something, and given her military training, it probably wasn't going to end well for her boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her hand unconsciously moved to her side. Where Marcus suspected she kept a concealed weapon. Whatever you're thinking, there are better ways, Marcus said. Legal ways. Ways that won't destroy your life too. My life is already destroyed, Sarah said quietly. Has been for months. Marcus finished bandaging her forehead, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to stay, to push harder, to get her away from this situation. But years of training had also taught him when to retreat and regroup. The offer stands, he said, packing up his medical supplies. Anytime, any reason. I'll answer. As they prepared to leave, Marcus took one last look around the apartment. In the kitchen, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A set of high-quality knives was missing from the wooden block on the counter. Only the smaller utility knives remained. Sarah followed his gaze and their eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her slight nod confirmed his suspicion. She was armed, she was trained, and she was reaching her breaking point. Sarah, he said quietly, promise me you'll call before you do anything you can't take back. I don't make promises anymore, she replied. They're too easy to break. Marcus and Jake left the apartment in heavy silence. As they loaded their equipment back into the ambulance, Jake finally spoke up. That was intense, man. You okay? Marcus looked back up at the fourth-floor window where a shadow moved behind thin curtains. She's going to kill him, Jake, or he's going to kill her. Maybe both. Not our problem once we leave the scene, Jake said, starting the engine. You know that. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Sarah Chen wasn't a typical domestic violence victim. She was a combat veteran with specialized training and access to weapons. More importantly, she was a medic who understood anatomy and knew exactly where and how to inflict maximum damage. The radio crackled with their next call, but Marcus found himself memorizing the address of Sarah's apartment building. Something told him he'd be back here soon, and next time it might not be for a medical emergency. As they drove through the dark Chicago streets, Marcus thought about the look in Sarah's eyes. He'd seen that same expression in Afghanistan, usually right before someone did something desperate and dangerous. It was the look of a person who had calculated all their options and decided that violence was the only answer left. The problem was, Marcus wasn't sure if she was planning to use that violence on her boyfriend or herself. Either way, he had a sinking feeling that the next time he saw Sarah Chen, it would be too late to help her. 3 blocks away from the apartment building, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and started researching Sarah Chen's military service record. If he was going to help her, he needed to understand exactly who he was dealing with. What he found in the public records made his blood run cold. Sarah Chen wasn't just any combat medic. She was a decorated special operations medic who had served with some of the most elite units in the military. She had commendations for valor, expert marksman ratings, and specialized training in close-quarters combat. Marcus realized he might have just met one of the most dangerous women in Chicago. 3 days passed before Marcus heard anything else about Sarah Chen. He'd checked the police reports every morning, half expecting to see a homicide call from her address. When his shift started Thursday evening, he couldn't concentrate on routine calls. Every domestic violence situation reminded him of the woman with green eyes and combat scars who was planning something dangerous. The call came in at 11:30 p.m. Possible overdose, 1247 South Ashland, apartment 4B. Victim unconscious, barely breathing. Marcus's heart stopped. Sarah's building, Sarah's apartment. He and Jake raced through the streets, sirens wailing, while Marcus prayed they weren't too late. But as they pulled up to the familiar building, something felt wrong. No police cars, no crowd of neighbors, no signs of the chaos that usually surrounded overdose calls. They climbed the stairs 2 at a time, medical bags bouncing against their legs. The apartment door was slightly open, which sent warning signals through Marcus's mind. Sarah was too paranoid and well-trained to leave her door unlocked, especially after what had happened earlier in the week. Chicago Fire Department paramedics, Marcus called out as they entered. The living room was clean now, furniture replaced, glass swept up. It looked like a completely different apartment. In here, came a weak voice from the bedroom. Marcus pushed open the bedroom door and froze. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, very much conscious and alert, while a man lay unconscious on the floor beside her. The man was large, probably 6'3" and heavily muscled, with tattoos covering his arms and the kind of aggressive posture that screamed trouble even while unconscious. "Meet Derek," Sarah said calmly. "My boyfriend." Marcus knelt beside the unconscious man, checking his pulse and breathing. Derek was alive but deeply sedated. His pupils were pinpoint small and his breathing was slow and shallow. Classic signs of opioid overdose, but something about the scene felt staged. "What happened?" Marcus asked, preparing naloxone while Jake called for police backup. He came back angry, high on something, started throwing things around again, threatening me. Sarah's voice was steady, almost clinical. Then he just collapsed. "I think he took too much of whatever he was using." Marcus administered the naloxone and began checking Derek's vital signs more thoroughly. That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was a small injection site on Derek's neck, barely visible but perfectly placed to hit the carotid artery. It was the kind of precise injection that required medical training to execute without killing the patient. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "did you call this in?" "Anonymous tip," she replied. "Thought someone should check on him." Marcus looked up at her face and saw the same calculating expression from 3 nights ago. Sarah hadn't overdosed accidentally. She had deliberately injected him with something, probably stolen from a medical facility, calibrated to knock him unconscious without killing him. But why? He hurt you again, Marcus said, noticing fresh bruises on her arms. He tried. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street. But I was ready this time. Derek began to stir as the naloxone took effect. His eyes opened, unfocused and confused. When he saw Marcus and Jake, panic flashed across his face. What the hell? Derek tried to sit up but was still too weak. Sarah, what did you do? I saved your life, Sarah said without turning around. You overdosed, Derek, almost died. These paramedics brought you back. Marcus watched the interaction carefully. Derek was scared, not just confused. He kept looking at Sarah like she was a loaded weapon, which Marcus was beginning to think might be accurate. I need to get him to the hospital, Marcus told Sarah. Overdose patients need monitoring for several hours. Of course, Sarah agreed. I'll ride with you. No, Derek said quickly, too quickly. I'm fine. I don't need the hospital. Marcus saw fear flash in Derek's eyes when Sarah stepped closer to the bed. Whatever had happened in this apartment before Marcus arrived, Derek now understood exactly who he was dealing with. Hospital protocol for overdose, Marcus insisted. Non-negotiable. As they loaded Derek onto the stretcher, Marcus noticed Sarah slip something into her pocket. It looked like a small medical vial, the kind used for injectable medications. When Derek saw it, his face went pale. During the ambulance ride to the hospital, Derek grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength for someone who'd just overdosed. She's crazy, man, Derek whispered. She's military, special forces or something. She knows how to kill people. What happened tonight? Marcus asked quietly. I came home drunk, maybe pushed her around a little. Next thing I know, she's got me in some kind of hold needle in my neck. Started talking about dosages and how easy it would be to make it look accidental. Derek's voice shook. She said she could make me disappear and no one would ever find the body. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Sarah hadn't just defended herself. She had demonstrated her capabilities, shown Derek exactly what she was capable of. It was psychological warfare, using her medical knowledge and combat training to terrorize him the same way he had terrorized her. At the hospital, Derek refused to press charges, claiming he didn't remember anything clearly. But Marcus saw him looking over his shoulder constantly, flinching every time a nurse approached with medication. Sarah waited in the family room, reading a magazine like nothing had happened. When Marcus approached her, she looked up with those sharp green eyes. He'll be fine, Marcus said, but you know what you did was illegal. I administered first aid to an overdose victim, Sarah replied calmly. Probably saved his life. Sarah, we both know that's not what happened. She closed the magazine and stood up. What do you think happened, Marcus? Marcus studied her face, looking for any sign of remorse or fear. He found neither. What he saw was a soldier who had assessed a threat and neutralized it using the most efficient means available. I think you gave him a taste of what you're capable of, Marcus said. I think you wanted him to understand that you're not helpless anymore. Sarah smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Marcus had ever seen. It was the smile of someone who had crossed a line and found they liked the view from the other side. Derek and I had a very educational conversation tonight, she said. I think we understand each other much better now. As Sarah walked away, Marcus realized the situation had just become infinitely more dangerous. Sarah hadn't snapped under pressure. She had coolly and methodically demonstrated her power, using her medical and combat training to send a message. The question was, what would she do for an encore? Marcus couldn't sleep after his shift ended. He kept thinking about Sarah's smile in the hospital waiting room and Derek's terrified whispers in the ambulance. As a former SEAL, Marcus understood the psychology of warfare, but what Sarah had done crossed lines that made him deeply uncomfortable. She hadn't just defended herself. She had become the aggressor using methods that bordered on torture. 2 weeks passed without any calls to Sarah's building. Marcus began to hope that maybe his intervention had helped, that perhaps Derek had learned his lesson and left Sarah alone. But his optimism shattered when he saw the news report on Friday morning. Local man found dead in apparent suicide, the anchor announced. Derek Morrison, 29, was discovered in his car in the parking lot of Navy Pier early this morning. Police report he died from a single gunshot wound to the head with no signs of foul play. Marcus's coffee mug slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor. Derek Morrison, Sarah's boyfriend, dead by apparent suicide just 2 weeks after Marcus had seen him terrified and broken in a hospital bed. He immediately called the Chicago Police Department, asking to speak with the detective handling the case. Detective Patricia Walsh agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near the hospital. "You knew the deceased?" Detective Walsh asked, sliding into the booth across from Marcus. She was a veteran cop with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. "I responded to a domestic violence call at his girlfriend's apartment a few weeks ago, then an overdose call a couple weeks later." Marcus chose his words carefully. "Something about this doesn't feel right." "What makes you say that?" Marcus told her about Sarah's military background, the injection site on Derek's neck, and Derek's fear during the ambulance ride. Detective Walsh listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small pad. "Interesting," she said when he finished, "because the suicide scene was almost too perfect. Gun registered to Morrison, powder burns consistent with self-infliction, suicide note typed on his computer. But there were a few things that bothered me." "Like what?" "Morrison was left-handed, but the gun was in his right hand. The note mentioned guilt over hurting someone he loved, but according to his friends, he was more likely to blame everyone else than take responsibility. And here's the kicker. There were microscopic injection marks on his neck, same location you described from the overdose call." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. "You think Sarah killed him?" "I think Sarah Chen is extremely smart, extremely well-trained, and extremely dangerous. But proving she murdered Derek Morrison is going to be nearly impossible." Detective Walsh opened a file folder and showed Marcus several photographs. The crime scene looked exactly like a suicide. Derek slumped in his car, gun in his lap, windows rolled up. But there was something about his posture that looked wrong to Marcus's trained eye. "If she did this, how?" Marcus asked. "Best guess? She injected him with something to sedate him. Staged the scene, put the gun in his hand, and pulled the trigger. The injection site would be explained by his recent overdose, and the sedative would be out of his system by the time we found him. That's incredibly risky. What if someone saw her? Navy Pier at 3 a.m.? Minimal security cameras in that section of the parking lot, and Chen would know how to avoid them. Plus, as a combat medic, she'd know exactly how much sedative to use and how long it would take to work." Marcus stared at the crime scene photos, his mind racing. "Why are you telling me this? Shouldn't this be classified information?" Detective Walsh leaned forward. "Because I need help. Sarah Chen is about to get away with murder, and I can't prove it. She's too smart, too careful, and too well-trained. But you've interacted with her? You might be the only person who can get close enough to gather evidence. You want me to spy on her? I want you to save lives. Because if Chen killed Morrison, this won't be the last time. She's learned she can get away with it." Marcus felt sick. The woman he'd tried to help, the combat veteran he'd respected, had potentially become a cold-blooded killer. Worse, she'd used her medical knowledge and military training to commit the perfect murder. "There's something else," Detective Walsh said. "We ran a background check on Chen after Morrison's death. She was discharged from the Army under unusual circumstances. Not quite dishonorable, but not honorable either." "What kind of circumstances?" "Classified, but I have a contact at the Pentagon who gave me some off-the-record information. Chen was involved in an incident in Afghanistan, where several Taliban prisoners died in custody. The official report said they died from injuries sustained during capture, but there were questions about whether Chen had administered inappropriate medical treatment." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him. "You're saying she's killed before?" "I'm saying Sarah Chen has a history of using her medical knowledge to hurt people, rather than help them. The military covered it up because she was valuable, and they didn't want the scandal. But they quietly transferred her to a non-combat role and pushed her toward discharge." The detective slid a business card across the table. "Think about it, Rodriguez. You're probably the only person she trusts right now. If you could get her to confess or even just gather enough evidence to build a case, we could stop her before she kills again." Marcus pocketed the card, his mind spinning. "And if I refuse? Then Sarah Chen walks free. And the next time someone makes her angry enough, we'll be looking at another suicide or accident or overdose. Except next time, it might be someone completely innocent who just happened to cross her at the wrong moment." As Marcus drove home, he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's smile in the hospital. At the time, he'd thought it was the smile of someone who had finally taken control of their life. Now he realized it was the smile of someone who had discovered they enjoyed having the power of life and death over other people. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Marcus, this is Sarah. I wanted to thank you for your help a few weeks ago. Derek and I worked things out. Would you like to get coffee sometime and talk about our military experiences? Marcus stared at the message, his hands shaking slightly. Sarah was reaching out to him, probably because she needed an ally, someone who would vouch for her character if questions arose about Derek's death. She was using their shared military background to build trust and sympathy. The question was, would Marcus play along to gather evidence, or would he refuse to get involved and let a potential killer go free? Either choice felt like a betrayal of everything he'd sworn to protect. Marcus stared at Sarah's text message for 3 hours before responding. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to stay away from a woman who might be a cold-blooded killer. But Detective Walsh's words echoed in his mind. If Sarah had killed Derek, she would likely kill again. As a former SEAL, Marcus had sworn an oath to protect innocent people, even if it meant putting himself in danger. He finally texted back, "Coffee sounds good. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m. Starbucks on Michigan Avenue?" Sarah's response came within minutes. "Perfect. Looking forward to catching up." The casual tone of her message chilled Marcus. If she had murdered Derek just days ago, she was showing no signs of guilt or stress. That level of emotional control suggested either complete innocence or complete sociopathy. Marcus spent the next day preparing for the meeting like it was a military operation. He researched everything he could find about Sarah's service record, her medical training, and her psychological profile. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture. Sarah Chen had been one of the most decorated combat medics in her unit, saving dozens of lives under extreme conditions. But there were gaps in her record, classified sections that his contacts couldn't access. The few details he could find suggested Sarah had been involved in enhanced interrogation techniques, using her medical knowledge to keep prisoners conscious during questioning. More troubling were the incident reports from her final deployment. 3 Taliban prisoners had died in custody within a 2-week period, all while under Sarah's medical care. The official cause of death was listed as complications from combat injuries, but Marcus found references to an internal investigation that had been quietly closed. When Marcus arrived at the coffee shop, Sarah was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall and clear sightlines to all exits. She looked completely different from the battered woman he'd treated weeks ago. Her hair was styled, her clothes were clean and professional, and she moved with the confident grace of someone completely in control. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Sarah said, standing to shake his hand. Her grip was firm and steady. "You look good. Civilian life treating you well?" "Can't complain," Marcus replied, settling into the seat across from her. "You look like you're doing better too. How are things with Derek?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a micro-expression of satisfaction that lasted barely a second. "Derek's not in the picture anymore. We decided we weren't compatible. That's probably for the best," Marcus said carefully. He seemed like he had some anger issues. "You could say that." Sarah sipped her coffee, her green eyes studying Marcus's face. "But I've learned that some problems have permanent solutions." The words sent ice through Marcus's veins. Was Sarah hinting at Derek's death, or was he reading too much into an innocent comment? "I wanted to talk to you about something," Sarah continued. "I've been thinking about going back to medical work. Maybe emergency medicine like what you're doing. I miss helping people." Marcus forced himself to remain calm. "That's great. Chicago can always use more experienced medics. The thing is, I'm worried about my background check. There were some incidents during my last deployment that might raise questions. Nothing serious, just military politics, but you know how paranoid civilian employers can be about veterans." Here it was. Sarah was fishing for information, trying to find out if anyone was investigating her military record. She was also building her cover story, portraying herself as a victim of military bureaucracy rather than someone who had potentially committed war crimes. "What kind of incidents?" Marcus asked. Sarah's eyes hardened slightly. "Prisoners died under my care. The Army blamed me for not saving them, even though they were critically injured when they came to me. They used me as a scapegoat to avoid admitting their interrogation techniques had gone too far." Marcus noticed how Sarah framed the story. She wasn't denying that prisoners had died, but she was positioning herself as the victim rather than the perpetrator. It was a clever psychological manipulation, designed to generate sympathy and deflect suspicion. "That's rough," Marcus said, "but any decent employer would understand that you can't save everyone." "Exactly. Sarah smiled, and Marcus recognized the same calculating expression from the hospital. I knew you'd understand. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Veterans need to stick together, especially when civilians try to judge situations they've never experienced. Marcus realized Sarah was trying to recruit him as an ally. She was using their shared military background to create a bond, making him complicit in her cover-up through solidarity and understanding. I've been thinking about Derek's death, Marcus said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. Suicide is always tragic, but it seemed so sudden. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Marcus noticed her hand tighten slightly around her coffee cup. Derek had a lot of demons. Drug problems, anger issues, depression. I tried to help him, but some people can't be saved. Did he seem suicidal when you last saw him? He was agitated, talking about how everything was hopeless. I told him he should get professional help, but he refused. Sarah shook her head sadly. I keep wondering if there was something more I could have done. Marcus felt sick listening to Sarah's performance. She was creating a narrative that painted Derek as mentally unstable, while positioning herself as the caring girlfriend who had tried to help. If anyone investigated Derek's death, Sarah's story would explain away any suspicious circumstances. The police said he left a suicide note, Marcus said. Yes, it was heartbreaking. He apologized for hurting me and said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Sarah's voice carried just the right note of grief and regret. At least he found some peace at the end. Marcus wanted to grab Sarah and shake her to force her to admit what she'd done. But he knew that would accomplish nothing except putting himself in danger. Instead, he played along, gathering information while trying to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. Have you thought about grief counseling? Marcus asked. Losing someone to suicide can be really traumatic, even if the relationship was complicated. I'm coping, Sarah said. Military training teaches you to compartmentalize, and honestly, I feel more relief than grief. Derek was becoming increasingly unstable. I was starting to worry about my safety. There it was. Sarah was already building her justification, creating a narrative where Derek's death was actually a blessing that had saved her from further abuse. Marcus realized he was sitting across from someone who had not only committed murder but had rationalized it so completely that she probably believed her own story. The meeting ended with Sarah suggesting they get together again soon. As Marcus walked to his car, he felt like he needed a shower. Sarah Chen wasn't just a killer. She was a predator who used her military training and medical knowledge to manipulate and destroy people while maintaining a facade of innocence and victimhood. Marcus knew he had to stop her before she killed again. The question was how to gather enough evidence to convict someone who was smart enough to commit the perfect murder. Marcus contacted Detective Walsh immediately after his coffee meeting with Sarah. They agreed to meet at the police station, where Walsh had set up a small task force to investigate Derek Morrison's death and Sarah's potential involvement in other suspicious incidents. How did it go? Walsh asked as Marcus entered the conference room. She's good. Really good. Marcus sat down heavily. She's already constructed a complete narrative that explains Derek's death, while making herself look like the victim. If I didn't know better, I'd believe every word. Detective Walsh introduced Marcus to Detective James Park, a specialist in psychological profiling, and Agent Lisa Martinez from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The federal involvement surprised Marcus until Martinez explained, "We've been tracking a pattern of suspicious deaths connected to former military medical personnel," Martinez said. Derek Morrison's death fits the profile, and Sarah Chen's background makes her a person of interest in a much larger investigation. How many deaths are we talking about? Marcus asked. Potentially dozens across multiple states, Park replied, opening a thick file. The victims are usually people who had conflicts with former military medics, abusive partners, difficult patients, hostile co-workers. Deaths appear accidental or self-inflicted, but they all share certain characteristics. Agent Martinez pulled out a map with red pins marking locations across the country. The deaths follow movement patterns that correlate with where certain discharged military medical personnel have relocated. We think there's a network of individuals using their training to commit murders that look like natural deaths. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You're saying Sarah might be part of some kind of serial killer network? We're saying the skills that make someone an effective combat medic, detailed knowledge of anatomy, access to medical supplies, ability to work under pressure, also make them very effective at committing undetectable murders. Walsh explained. Detective Park showed Marcus several case files. In Arizona, an abusive husband had died from an apparent heart attack, but his wife was a former Army medic. In Florida, a rapist had died from complications following a minor car accident, but the emergency room doctor who treated him was an ex-Marine corpsman. In Texas, a domestic violence case had ended when the perpetrator died from an allergic reaction to medication he'd never been allergic to before. In each case, the deaths could be explained by natural causes or accidents, Martinez said, but the statistical probability of this many people dying under these circumstances, all connected to former military medical personnel, is essentially zero. So what's the connection? Marcus asked. We think they're communicating through online forums, sharing techniques and target information, Park explained. It's like a support group for military medics who've decided to use their skills for vigilante justice. Agent Martinez pulled up a laptop showing encrypted chat logs that had been partially decoded. The conversations were cryptic but chilling. Discussions of patient outcomes, treatment protocols, and permanent solutions that clearly weren't, referring to legitimate medical care. Here's where it gets interesting, Walsh said. We found evidence that Sarah Chen has been active in several of these forums under multiple usernames. She's been sharing detailed medical information about how to cause deaths that appear natural. Marcus read over the decoded messages, his blood running cold. Sarah hadn't just killed Derek. She had been teaching others how to commit undetectable murders. The woman he'd tried to help was actually a predator, who was spreading her deadly knowledge to other killers. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. We need evidence of Sarah's activities that would hold up in court, Martinez replied. The forum communications are circumstantial, and Derek's death was too well staged to prove murder. But if you could get Sarah to confess, or if you could catch her in the act of planning another murder, we might be able to build a case. You want me to go undercover? We want you to be yourself, Walsh corrected. Stay in contact with Sarah. Let her think you're sympathetic to her situation. Former military, understands the stresses of combat. Might be willing to look the other way if she admits to something questionable. Detective Park leaned forward. Based on her psychological profile, Sarah is probably looking for validation. She's proud of what she's done and wants recognition for her skills. If she trusts you enough, she might start bragging about her accomplishments. Marcus thought about Sarah's demeanor at the coffee shop. The subtle satisfaction when she mentioned Derek. The way she'd hinted at permanent solutions to problems. Park was right. Sarah wanted to be admired for her cleverness. What if she realizes I'm investigating her? Marcus asked. Then you become her next target, Martinez said bluntly. Sarah Chen is extremely dangerous and she won't hesitate to eliminate threats. We'll have surveillance on you, but if she decides you're a problem, we might not be able to react fast enough. Marcus considered the risks. Sarah was a trained killer with medical knowledge and military experience. If she suspected he was working with law enforcement, she could easily stage his death to look like an accident or suicide. But the alternative was letting her continue killing innocent people. I'll do it, Marcus said, but I want full surveillance and backup. If this goes wrong, I don't want to end up as another suicide statistic. The team spent the next 2 hours planning Marcus's approach. He would maintain contact with Sarah, gradually building trust while encouraging her to share more details about her past. They equipped him with recording devices and established protocols for emergency extraction if the situation became dangerous. Remember, Agent Martinez warned as the meeting concluded, Sarah Chen is a predator who views other people as problems to be solved. She's killed at least once, probably many more times, and she's part of a network that's been operating for years. Don't let her military service or her history as a victim make you sympathetic. She's chosen to become a monster. As Marcus drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. Sarah was smart, paranoid, and extremely dangerous. If she suspected he was investigating her, she would strike first and ask questions later. But worse than the physical danger was the psychological horror of what he'd learned. Sarah wasn't just a domestic violence victim who had snapped under pressure. She was a serial killer who had turned her medical training into a weapon, teaching others to do the same. The woman he'd tried to save had become something far more dangerous than her abuser ever was. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Had a great time catching up today. Want to get dinner this weekend? I have some interesting stories from my deployment that I think you'd appreciate. Marcus stared at the message, knowing that Sarah's interesting stories were probably confessions to murder disguised as war anecdotes. He was about to enter the most dangerous operation of his life, and his target was someone who killed people for sport, while hiding behind a facade of victimhood and service. Marcus agreed to dinner with Sarah at a quiet restaurant on the north side of Chicago. The FBI had wired him with the latest recording equipment, nearly invisible devices that would capture every word of their conversation. Detective Walsh's team positioned surveillance units around the restaurant while Agent Martinez monitored from a nearby van. Sarah arrived looking stunning in a black dress that concealed any weapons she might be carrying. She moved with predatory grace, scanning the restaurant before settling into the booth Marcus had chosen, one that gave her a clear view of all exits while keeping her back protected. "You look nervous," Sarah observed as they ordered drinks. "Everything okay? Just tired? Long shift yesterday." Marcus forced himself to relax. "You mentioned deployment stories. I'm always interested in hearing about other people's experiences." Sarah smiled, and Marcus saw the same calculating expression he'd noticed before. "I thought you might appreciate some of the creative problem-solving we had to do in Afghanistan. Medical challenges that required unconventional solutions." She launched into what sounded like war stories, treating wounded soldiers under fire, performing surgery with improvised equipment, saving lives against impossible odds. But Marcus began to notice disturbing undercurrents in her narratives. Every story involved Sarah having complete control over whether someone lived or died, and she seemed to relish describing the moments when she chose death. "There was this one Taliban fighter," Sarah said, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. "Came in with multiple gunshot wounds, probably wouldn't have survived anyway. But he kept spitting at the nurses, calling them whores, threatening to kill Americans when he recovered. What did you do?" "I realized his IV had become dislodged," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Unfortunately, I was busy with other patients and didn't notice for several hours. By the time we reestablished his IV line, he'd lost too much blood. Sometimes medical emergencies happen faster than we can respond." Marcus felt sick. Sarah was describing deliberately letting a prisoner die while making it sound like an accident. She was confessing to murder while portraying herself as a dedicated medic, overwhelmed by circumstances. "That must have been difficult," Marcus said, knowing the recording equipment was capturing every word. "It was a learning experience," Sarah replied. "I realized that sometimes the most merciful thing you can do is let nature take its course. Not everyone deserves to be saved." The statement sent chills through Marcus. Sarah had just revealed her core philosophy, that she had the right to decide who lived and died based on her personal judgment of their worthiness. "Like with Derek?" Marcus asked carefully. Sarah's eyes sharpened, but her expression remained calm. "Derek was a different situation. He made his own choices. But you said his death was sudden, unexpected, was it?" Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Derek was an abusive drug addict who threatened violence against women. He overdosed in my apartment and I performed CPR and called for help. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, people don't survive their own poor decisions." Marcus realized Sarah was testing him, gauging his reaction to her veiled confession. She was seeing if he would accept her version of events or press for more details. "You did everything you could," Marcus said, playing along. "Some people can't be helped." "Exactly." Sarah's smile widened. "I knew you'd understand. Veterans learn to make hard choices that civilians can't comprehend." As dinner continued, Sarah became more open about her philosophy. She talked about problematic individuals who drained resources from society, abusers who would never change, criminals who couldn't be rehabilitated. In her mind, eliminating such people was a public service. "The justice system is broken," Sarah said over dessert. "Rapists get probation, domestic abusers get restraining orders they ignore, drug dealers get plea bargains. But medical professionals, we have opportunities to provide real justice." "What kind of opportunities?" Marcus asked. Sarah glanced around the restaurant, then leaned closer. "A heart attack during routine surgery, an allergic reaction to medication, a blood clot that develops during recovery. There are so many ways the human body can fail, especially when it's already under stress." Marcus forced himself to maintain his composure while Sarah essentially confessed to multiple murders. She was describing methods for killing patients, while making their deaths appear natural. Exactly what the FBI suspected was happening across the country. "You Make it sound easy, Marcus said. It requires skill and knowledge, Sarah replied. But the hardest part is identifying the right targets. You have to be certain they deserve it, that the world will be better without them. How do you identify targets? Sarah's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Research. Background checks. Criminal records. Talking to their victims. You'd be amazed how many monsters walk among us protected by laws that should be protecting their victims instead. Marcus realized Sarah was describing a hunting process. She wasn't just killing people she encountered randomly. She was actively seeking out victims who met her criteria for elimination. Have you identified any targets recently? Marcus asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Why do you ask? Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead. Had he pushed too hard? Was Sarah becoming suspicious? Just curious about your methods, he said. As a fellow veteran, I appreciate tactical thinking. Sarah relaxed slightly. There's actually someone I've been watching. An emergency room doctor at Chicago General, Dr. Kevin Walsh. He's been overprescribing opioids to young women, then trading continued prescriptions for sexual favors. The hospital knows but won't act because he brings in too much revenue. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Sarah was describing Detective Walsh's brother, who worked at Chicago General. Either this was an incredible coincidence or Sarah had discovered the investigation and was planning to eliminate the detective's family member as a warning. That's horrible, Marcus managed to say. Someone should do something about him. Someone will, Sarah said with quiet confidence. Dr. Walsh is scheduled for surgery next week. Minor procedure, but surgery always carries risks. Sometimes patients have unexpected reactions to anesthesia. Marcus realized Sarah was planning to murder Dr. Walsh during his surgery, probably by administering a fatal drug combination that would appear to be an anesthetic accident. She was giving him details because she trusted him, because she thought he was a fellow veteran who would appreciate her twisted sense of justice. You've really thought this through, Marcus said. Planning is everything, Sarah replied. The key is making sure there's no connection between you and the target. Dr. Walsh doesn't know me, has never seen me before. I'll be just another medical professional assisting with his procedure. Marcus excused himself to use the restroom, knowing the surveillance team would be listening to every word through his wire. He hoped they were already moving to protect Dr. Walsh and gather enough evidence to arrest Sarah before she could act. When he returned to the table, Sarah was checking her phone. I have to cut dinner short, she said. Medical emergency at the hospital. Duty calls. As Marcus watched Sarah leave the restaurant, he realized the investigation had just taken a terrifying turn. Sarah wasn't just confessing to past murders. She was actively planning her next kill, and unless the FBI could stop her in the next few days, Dr. Kevin Walsh would become another victim of the most dangerous serial killer Marcus had ever encountered, the SEAL medic who had once frozen when he realized Sarah's combat experience now, understood the full scope of what she had become. She wasn't just a killer. She was a predator who used her medical knowledge to hunt human beings while hiding behind a facade of service and righteousness, and tomorrow she would strike again.